This happened in 1996 in my hometown of about 100,000 people. I was 15 years old from the suburbs and went to a high school in the city. I finished with class and for some reason I decided to walk to the main bus station instead of just waiting at the nearest bus stop. I stood at the gate that my bus line number 15 starts from. Another bus line number 17 also starts from the same gate. After waiting for about 10 minutes, a man asks me if bus number 17 is taken off yet. I say yes, I'm sorry, you just missed it. The man, who looked to be at least 30, maybe 40, then introduces himself to me as Mark. He stretches out his hand for me to shake it. I didn't want to be impolite, so I do. I introduce myself as Maya. My name is not Maya. It was bizarre to me that a grown man was introducing himself to me at a bus station. I may have been 15, but I knew better. He asked me if I just finished school. I say yes. Then he asks me what school I go to. I lie. Then asks if I'm going home. I say no, even though I am. Then asks me where I'm going, and I say to a friend's house. My bus pulls up and I get on it. Strangely, this man, Mark, gets on as well. I know for a fact he'd asked me if number 17 had taken off yet. If he was originally planning on going on number 17, there is absolutely no reason to get on my bus, number 15. They don't have a single stop in common. I sit down and he sits himself next to me. He asks me which year of high school I'm in. I lie for some reason and say I'm a junior. I was actually a freshman at the time. He says I look too young to be a junior. I say I hear that all the time. Then he asks me if I have a boyfriend and I say no, and he says that I should. I then ask him where he is going and he says he's going home. I ask if he isn't planning on taking number 17. He says no, and tells me he lives at the very end of bus line 15. That was odd. I've never seen him on the bus before. He asked me if I'm on my way home as well, and I say no, that I'm visiting a friend. Looking back, he knew I was lying. I was sure he believed me, and I really thought I had the situation under control. I should have walked to the bus driver and told him what was going on. I didn't because I was just scared, and I didn't want to make a scene out of nothing. There were plenty of people around, and while he was strange, I really thought that he was just a harmless, lonely weirdo. We get to my stop. I purposely miss it, and I get off at the next one, thinking I'll fool him and then just walk home a bit longer. To my surprise, he gets off as well, and I ask him where he's going, and he says he wants to walk me home. Again, I tell him that I'm not going home. I'm visiting a friend. He says that's fine, he'll walk me. I say he really doesn't need to, and in a stern, irritated tone, he tells me to shut up and walk. There is no one on the street now. We are the only ones who got off the bus here. I'm alone with this weird man who followed me from the bus station. I can't go home because I don't want him to know where I live. I start panicking and I don't know what to do, so I just freeze and stand there, silent. In an instant, he went from weird but chatty and smiley to telling me to shut up, and I went from feeling in control to knowing I really fucked up. He put his hand on my shoulder and tells me that he doesn't have much time, so we should get going. I want to tell him that he clearly does, but I don't want to anger him more, so I just nod. He tells me that if I'm good, I don't have to be scared of him. I lie and say I'm not scared. He asks me if that means I plan on being good. I say yes. He forced me to repeat it in a whole sentence. Yes, I will be good. I begin walking. I don't know where I was going, I just walked. He walked with me, with his hand on my shoulder still. I was never religious growing up, but I remember praying that I don't pass out. My heart was beating so fast and breathing was difficult. I was sure I was about to collapse and die. Then I spotted an older man tending to his garden in front of a house. That's the last thing I remember. I have a vague memory of running. I was later told that I was screaming for help while running towards the older man, while Mark ran off. The older man called the police and they contacted my parents. The police couldn't do anything but take my statement. Since my parents both worked and couldn't take me to and from school, they bought me a new phone the very same day. This was in the 90s when mobile phones were a luxury. I wish the story ended here. After the event, I only ever got on the bus at the stop right in front of my school. A few weeks passed, and I did so like I did any other day. We locked eyes as soon as I stepped on. He was on the bus with the biggest grin on his face, like he couldn't be more excited to see me. I was so creeped out, I immediately got off and ran into the school. I called my mom in tears, and she had me find a teacher to walk me to her car when she came to get me. The school was then notified on the situation. After that, he was spotted walking around the school several times, sometimes a few days in a row, but sometimes he wasn't seen for weeks. The police were of no help. They couldn't do anything until he actually hurt me, or showed up on school property or at my home. I spent the rest of the year waiting in the school until late afternoon so my mom could pick me up after work. We always took a very long route home. I now know that she was making sure we weren't being followed. My parents then had me switch schools. Thankfully, he was never spotted in my neighborhood, and I'm very sure he never found out my name or got my address. I only ever saw him one more time. I was 21, in my hometown, on summer break from university. I saw him in a grocery store in a whole different part of town. He didn't seem to recognize me, didn't even really look at me, but I immediately recognized him. Where I live, there is no convicted criminal list like in the US. Such cases are not reported, and I never found out the man's full name. I have no idea who he is or what he has done in the past. I don't know what he would have done to me. My belief is that he might have been mentally challenged, saw me, liked me, and followed me. My mother believes that it was much more complex, that he was planning something, that he knew exactly where we were going. My dad still doesn't talk about it. I'm just happy he's out of my life.
Life is truly filled with horror stories. These traumatic events leave many people with severe and life-altering injuries, but even after the trauma, the struggle isn't over. Have you ever thought about what you would do after you got injured? If you had medical bills to pay but no ability to work? How would you know that your insurance companies or the people responsible for your injuries are being fair to you? Then, trying to navigate the situation with traditional law firms can be a daunting, confusing ordeal that brings even more pain. The piles of paperwork, the hours of your valuable time used up, and the expensive fees hitting you while you're already down. With Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, that won't be a problem. When you're seriously hurt, your injury could be worth millions. Morgan & Morgan don't accept lowball settlements from insurance companies. In recent months, they've achieved massive victories for victims of serious car crashes. In Florida, they achieved a verdict for $12 million, which was 34 times greater than the highest insurance offer. In Philadelphia, they achieved a verdict for a $26 million payout, 40 times more than the highest settlement offered by the insurance company. Morgan & Morgan will fight for you to get the best outcome if you become their client. If you hire Morgan & Morgan, you won't just be assigned a single lawyer, but an entire dedicated legal team with lawyers, case investigators, paralegals, and customer care specialists, all working to maximize your settlement. On top of that, there are thousands of support staff available at all hours to help you with any questions or concerns about your case, making the experience as painless as possible. The best part is, you don't pay them a penny unless you win your case. And Morgan & Morgan didn't become the largest injury law firm for no reason. It's because they win a lot. Even better, they've modernized the injury law process, so it only takes minutes to see if you have a case, and you can submit your claim on your phone. If you ever get seriously injured, your case could be worth millions, and you're only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. It's easy. You can start your claim with Morgan & Morgan at www.forthepeople.com/MJV, found in the description below or by scanning the QR code on screen with your phone's camera. You can type in your name, phone number, zip code, and email address, select the type of your claim, then describe what happened. Click or tap Start Your Claim and you're done. Remember, Morgan & Morgan is the largest injury law firm in the United States, so they have all the resources and know-how to see your case through. There's no company too big for Morgan & Morgan to fight, and they'll fight for you to get the settlement you deserve if you become their client.
I know it's still February, but I'm writing this story because I can't wait for summer, and I strongly dislike the cold, windy winter weather. This story happened to me back in the summer of 2018, and I was transitioning into the 8th grade. I went to a sleepaway camp in the Appalachian Mountains. I considered it a second home for me. I didn't really have to worry about schoolwork, besides summer homework, and I made some of the greatest friends I had ever had there. This is one of my main reasons why summer is my favorite season. I got along with literally everyone at the camp, except this one person made me see how dangerous people can really be. That summer, there was a new counselor whose name was Art. He looked to be about in his 50s, due to his white hair and his slightly wrinkled skin. Being a camp counselor in your 50s does not seem right to me. I don't know about you guys, but it gives off pedophile vibes to me. When I and my bunk first met him, he seemed like a trustworthy person, though. For the first week of camp, he helped us clean out our bunk when it was dirty and talked to us whenever we were feeling down. I and my bunk didn't have any problem with him from the start, but the girls around camp would talk behind Art's back. They would say something like, "He's a creepy old man that probably preys on children." After all, he is way older than all the other counselors, so I can see where they were coming from. One night, things got a little intense. We had a recess night where we got to do whatever we wanted to, and I and my fellow bunkmates played tennis with each other. During the game, Art would watch us the whole time. During that time, he would give off a big grin that looked like how Pennywise the clown from It would grin. I actually thought this was creepy. Why was he smiling like that? Was he really who the girls say he is? Part of me thought he was just admiring how much fun we were all having. It didn't stop there, though. Another night, when I came out of the shower, I saw a shaving cream bottle. Now, this is when I was starting to go through my puberty phases, but I didn't have any facial hair yet. I walked over to the bottle where it was on the bathroom sink, and I grabbed it and examined the whole thing. As soon as I did that, though, I felt tense hand grips touch my arms. I turned around to see who it was, and it was Art. His facial expression had such a strong demeanor. He then spoke. "Listen to me, you little cunt. I'm not going to have you ever touch my belongings, you got that?" I didn't know what was going on because everything was happening so fast. I was really scared, so I just complied with, "Yes, good. You better not do it again, or else I'm going to kill you," he threatened. I then walked out of the bathroom with my bathrobe still on, and I was still shaking from what had just happened seconds ago. I was surprised to see no one else in the bunk had even heard the whole encounter. I didn't feel comfortable telling anyone about this. It was just embarrassing. Later, I was able to cool off, but from there, I will try my best to avoid Art as much as I can. It was now the end of the first week of camp, and one last thing happened that almost made me want to go home and never return to the camp. It was like a Tuesday or Wednesday night on the second week of camp, and I and my bunk were just heading back from movie night, which the camp decided to do that night. It was also Art's night off. This made me happy because I didn't feel safe around him, knowing that he threatened me days before. I got back to the cabin, and about 15 minutes inside the cabin, I heard someone screaming from a distance. There were definitely like 10 little girls screaming. This went on for another minute, and then it stopped. I and all my other bunkmates looked at each other in confusion as to what could possibly be going on out there. We had 3 counselors present with us that night, and 2 counselors told us to stay here as they were going to investigate what was happening, while the other counselors stayed with us. We all listened and stayed put. About an hour and a half passed, and our 2 counselors were still gone. Something major had to have happened. It was also time for lights out, and so the counselor who was still with us turned the lights off, and we were all in bed. I guess we would all find out what really happened the next morning. Morning time then came, and we were eating breakfast at the camp's dining hall. We were allowed to sit wherever we wanted to, so that's what we did. I sat down with a few of my bunkmates, and some other girls sat down with us. As we were eating, one of the girls finally told us the whole story of what happened last night. One of the younger girls' cabins heard some noises from their bedroom last night, while their counselors were outside talking to each other. The girls went to go see what the noise was, and when they reached the bottom stall where the noise was coming from, they opened the door, and they all saw the one and only 50-year-old counselor, Art, sitting on the toilet with his pants down, revealing his genitals. He then smiled and said, "Hey, pretty girls." That is when all the girls screamed and ran out of the cabin, which were the screams we heard. They ran so far deep into the woods while one of the 2 of their counselors followed behind. Art was still inside of the bathroom while 2 of their counselors remained at the cabin, and the other counselors, including 2 of mine, went inside. And they all saw him sitting on the toilet with his pants down. That's when 3 male counselors wrestled Art to the ground and held him down there. Another counselor then called for the camp police on his walkie-talkie and said everything that all went down. When the police arrived, Art was still down in the same position, and that's when he was taken away in the police car. He was still in custody that morning, and that young girl had to sleep in a couple of other girls' cabins because they were clearly not safe there. Everyone at my table just stopped eating, and all of our jaws were dropped. I'm sure every other table was talking about it as well. My heart went out to all the little girls who had seen true terror last night. I did one more summer after that summer at the sleepaway camp, and nothing that severe had happened again. Art obviously never returned again to the camp, and I wouldn't be too surprised if he is still being held in some sort of institution to keep him away from children. Monsters like him should be held in prison for a very long time, maybe even life. I hope he is getting all the hard time he deserves in prison, because child predators like him don't belong in this world.
My husband had remained close to his childhood friend, who I'll call John, well into adulthood. They had met in elementary school and became inseparable ever since. When I was dating my husband and met John, I thought he was such a nice guy. He had a very docile nature and a wholesome character. Everyone felt comfortable around him. John was the type of person that could get along with anyone. He was trustworthy, dependable, and genuinely kind. I was happy that my husband was able to keep such a good friend in this day and age when true friendships are so hard to find. Both me and my husband are estranged from our families, so we were lucky to have someone like John in our lives, and we considered him like family. John was a nerd, like us, so we had many of the same interests. We would meet up every once in a while to grab something to eat, catch a movie, or just hang out at the house playing retro board games and discussing technology. We all three had a love of computers, so my husband and John often shared with each other small programs that they could write. My husband and I built computers for a time, and John would come by to give his opinion and advise us on our projects. I suppose the only curious thing about John at that point was that he never really had a girlfriend. In all the years we knew him, he had always been single. He never even dated. I didn't understand why such a nice guy hadn't found someone yet. Our lives seemed to evolve and change, but John just sort of stayed where he had always been, living with his family, and never became involved with anyone romantically. And for a while there, we started thinking that maybe he was gay and was simply scared to reveal it, since he had a pretty traditional family who he was very close to. And though we wandered amongst ourselves, we never brought it up to him, as it seemed kind of inappropriate. It would be like we were invading his privacy or meddling in his life, and we figured that he would eventually find someone when he was ready. John suddenly moved away to a city that was 3 hours away. When he told us, we thought at first that he had decided to finally move on his own, but we were wrong. He had actually moved into a home that his older sister had bought for her retirement. Since she wasn't ready to retire just yet, she was letting him stay there for the time being, and that's when things began to change. John sort of fell off the map. He wouldn't call, he wouldn't visit, nor ask us to come visit him. My husband and I figured it was because of the distance. Also, he was probably settling into his new place and getting accustomed to a new city. But time continued passing, and I could tell my husband was really missing his friend. And I had to admit that I was too. We had such good times together, and it was so unlike John to disconnect like that. It was so difficult to get in contact with him on the phone, and he wasn't very active on his social media either. And I started to worry about him. I also didn't want my husband to continue distancing himself from his best friend, as it could become permanent. And so I made it my mission to reignite our friendship. I called John and arranged for us to go visit him. Surprisingly, he didn't seem to even acknowledge the fact that it had been about 2 years since we had last seen each other. When we arrived at his place, I was taken a little aback, as I hadn't been expecting what I saw. The house was in a pretty secluded neighborhood in the middle of nowhere, actually, and I didn't know how he could get used to it here, going from a big city and all. And also, I hate to say this, but the house seemed dirty and messy, and John told us that he had transferred his job to this new city. Even though they offered him a promotion, he had declined it, and he didn't want to work the extra hours. I looked around and thought that this made sense, since it seemed like John didn't like leaving the house very much, and I chuckled to myself as I thought the house looked more like a bunker than a home. To my dismay, I saw that John had his own room, as if he was still a teenager. In fact, it was decorated as if that is exactly what he still was. It was a mess in there. Computers and computer equipment on the floor, wires everywhere, clothes thrown about all over the place. And John said his sister came to stay every other weekend, so she had the main bedroom for herself. He expressed how he hated for his privacy to be interrupted when she stayed over, but what could he do? And I thought to myself that he could just get his own place, but I didn't say it out loud. We all decided to go to dinner and browse some of the stores in the area, and I couldn't help myself any longer and asked John why we had lost contact. It had become so difficult to get a hold of him lately, and he kind of just shrugged it off and said that he had been so busy with the move that he must have lost track of time. He didn't ever want to lose contact like that with us again, and he appeared genuine, but something felt off to me. His answers were too short and generic, as if there had been some sort of script or he had practiced somehow. My husband told him that he thought that he would have had his own place by now since he moved all the way out here, and John said that it was just financially easier this way. Again, another short and very generic reply. I asked him if he was seeing anyone, and he said that he wasn't in a position to really do that right now, as he really wanted to get his finances in order first. I thought that every reply he gave made sense and was perfectly reasonable, but I also knew that he was lying. Rather, he was hiding. I just didn't know what it was. It was just this nagging feeling that I couldn't shake off, and John just didn't seem like the person that we had known once. My husband and I drove home, kind of confused but glad that we had spent some time with our old friend, and it had been a long time coming. John certainly answered all of the questions that we had been curious about. We believed that now that we had resumed contact that we would see more of him, but that didn't happen. John continued to be distant. His social media continued to not be updated, but I did notice something strange. Since I have him as a friend, I could see whatever he did that was public. And I noticed that he was liking Nickelodeon programs and would sometimes make comments on their posts. The comments would just mention how good a show's last episode was, or how he couldn't wait to find out what happened next. And I found this kind of odd. His comments also seemed to have been written by someone much younger and not a man in his late 30s, who still watched kids' programs at that age. Oh well, I just chalked it up to John always having been sort of innocent, I guess. And besides, some adults still watch cartoons, right? And I suppose there isn't anything too weird then with an adult liking kids' sitcoms. And I didn't mention it to my husband. I'm not sure why. I just felt like I was, once again, a little nosy, invading John's privacy somehow. After all, it's not like I had purposely searched for this information. Besides, what would be the point of even mentioning it? It's just TV shows. And over the next couple of years, John visited us one time. Once again, I had to make a monumental effort to get him to meet with us, even though he traveled our way often to visit his mother. And I got this uncanny feeling that John was avoiding us. Again, as if he was hiding, but hiding what? My husband had pretty much accepted the fact that his friendship had somehow grown apart, and things would never be as they were before. No point of continuing to force the situation, and I resigned myself to that fact as well. It happens. I figured it happened more commonly with childhood friends since people do tend to go in different directions in adulthood. Some more time passed and my husband mentioned John to me. He told me that he had wondered what he'd been up to and how it seemed like no matter how hard he tried, he kept losing contact with him. I could tell my husband was annoyed and couldn't call John because he was upset, and I decided to just give him a call myself. I hoped he still had his same number, and luckily he did. John informed me that he had recently moved back in with his mother. She needed him to be closer to her due to her ailing health, and I told him it was good he was back because we were planning on visiting my father so we could swing by and see him as well. And for the first time, John actually sounded strained and evasive. It didn't sound like himself at all. He told me that he really hadn't been expecting to move back, so he was having trouble getting settled in. And for this reason, he said that he would not be able to meet with us this soon. We would have to meet the following month. And that struck me as strange since his mother's house was the house he grew up in. He had his own bedroom there, so why would it be so difficult to settle in? I accepted his wishes, though, and told him that the following month we would plan on hanging out for sure. Nothing could have prepared me and my husband for what happened next, though. As the month we were supposed to meet approached, my husband called me to come downstairs and look at the TV. He then said to hurry, and I thought he was just being dramatic since he sometimes did so to get me to go see what he was watching, so I reluctantly went downstairs. I immediately noticed that he was white as a sheet. Now he had my attention, and I asked him what in the world was wrong now. He told me to look at this as he holds the remote in his hand, pointing it to the TV. And I sat down next to him, and he starts playing a news segment that was showing a courtroom. Suddenly, John is led in by a bailiff wearing an orange suit with his hands and feet shackled, and I literally did a double take as I couldn't believe that it was the same person. I thought my husband was joking and was playing a video showing John or a look-alike like John, but there was no denying it was truly him. His full name was right there on the screen. The newscaster said that yet another man, John, has just been arrested in connection with one of the largest child trafficking rings that has been dismantled in recent history. John was just one of the many individuals who had been caught when the police successfully obtained their information from a website on the dark web that had been shut down for featuring and spreading CSAM, or child exploitation material. The investigation had been going on for a few years. Both of our mouths were wide open as we stared at the TV in disbelief. My husband told me that he had been searching for a local TV show when he came across this. He told me he just couldn't believe it. He must have watched it over 20 times before he called me downstairs to see for myself, and I was speechless. Sometime later, when the initial shock subsided, my husband went online to search more information, and it appears that John's mother's home and his sister's home had both been raided, and they found hundreds of child exploitation content on his computer. John must have been collecting them since his youth. There also had been a DNA match. There wasn't much more information than that, and I was thankful for it as neither of us wanted to know what exactly that meant. John is going to be going to prison for the next 30-plus years, and he'll be an old man by the time he makes it to his first parole hearing and would have to wear an ankle monitor for the remaining years if he was ever to actually be released. And we saw that his sister removed his name from the house that she had bought. She also removed all mention of him from her social media, and for his family to have disowned him, the details of what John did must be truly horrific, and it's obvious his family has no doubt of his guilt. I feel so sorry for his poor mother. She was such a sweet lady. She had already lost 2 sons, and now she lost a third. My husband and I removed John from our contact list and any trace of him from our social media as well. We severed all ties. We decided to not even contact his family, and we will not be visiting him in prison either, though we have so many unanswered questions. This event broke my husband somehow. He has become very paranoid and distrustful of other people, and he's refused to make any new friends. I can understand him, though. It's life-changing when you realize that you never truly know anyone, regardless of how close you are to them. Not really, anyway. The sweet, humble guy that had slept in our home and shared so many great times with us had been an illusion, a very good magic trick. It's as if he hadn't ever existed except in our own minds. John had been hiding something after all, and he had been hiding that he was really a monster.